Good evening, everyone. We're on day one of the Big Cheese Weekend. I hope you've all had a lovely Friday, and we've got so much to look forward to on Saturday and Sunday. We're here this evening with the lovely Stacey Hedges and with the even lovelier Andy Swinscoe. No offence, Stacey.
So, none taken.
And we're going to be talking about the amazing cheeses that Stacey makes and pairing it with some wine that's been chosen by Tommy Banks. So that's exciting. So just as we let the participants join, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going to happen tomorrow, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end. We've got the guys up in Cheshire. We've got 3 cheesemakers. They've got their acts together and they're having a little farmers market on their own at Bidley Dairy in Cheshire. I was going to say where it is and I've forgotten. So that's all fun. And then we're over in Borough Market tomorrow at the Gilderfine Food Offices at number 42. And we've got the lovely presentation from Brindisa of some Spanish cheeses and Spanish wines. And then in the afternoon, we've got Patrick McGuigan, the legend, doing his talk about how to be a cheese judge. So we've got some lovely people joining us here in the chat. Thank you. Do tell us where you are joining from. We've got Jane in Swindon. Hi, Jane. Jane is fantastic. She helps out at loads of the cheese awards. And we've got Jean from York. Hello, Jean. Do put in the chat where you're joining from, and do put in the chat or in the Q&A any questions you would like to ask Stacey or Andy, and then I will field those. I'm going to disappear and let these guys tell you all about their lives. Hi, Ian from Aberdeen. Ian was just in our other webinar about Belton cheese, and he asked some brilliant questions. So hello. Oh, we've got Belfast, we've got South Wales, Suffolk, hello Bill, Oxfordshire, so from all around the country. Welcome. Okay, without further ado, Stacey, I'm going to pin you. Get that. That's a Zoom technology talk. Spotlight for everyone. The spotlight is on you. Welcome, Stacey, and welcome to the Academy of Cheese, Big Cheese Weekender. I want you to tell us all about yourself, please, and your journey to cheese.
All right. Thank you very much, Tracy, for that introduction and for inviting me to come on. It's a real honour to be on something like this and on the first day for the weekend, so that's great. And thank you also for the guests for joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll make it interesting. Hopefully you can yes, as Tracy said, add some questions on, and hopefully Andy and I will be able to answer those. So also a big thank you to Andy for facilitating this in terms of sending out the boxes of cheese and wine, which are fantastic, and I hope you've all got your tasting boxes. And just a little bit about Andy, who is an amazing cheesemonger, has a fantastic company up called the Courtyard Dairy up in Settle, and if you're ever going past, it's just an incredible cheese shop. So I know that whenever Andy is sending my cheeses out, they're in the best possible condition they can be. So I'm really thrilled that we supply him. So I'll just start with a little bit of background about me. So as you can probably tell, I'm not English. I moved from Australia in my 20s and came over as a chef, was working in London, and somehow found myself having a midlife crisis with 3 young children in the Hampshire countryside. And so it was a big move for me, being a city girl from Sydney, from about 3 miles from the central business district to rural Hampshire. And I thought, right, what can I do that is interesting, that suits the environment that I live in? There were quite a few dairy farmers locally. And I'd always had a fascination with cheese. So that came from when I was a student in Sydney. I'd worked in a cheese shop as my Saturday job, and I just found it incredible that you could start with milk and end up with so many different varieties of cheeses with you know, huge number of textures and flavors and different molds and things. So that had always been in the back of my mind, that I wanted to learn how to make cheese, a bit like people wanting to learn about wine, I guess. So kind of long story short, I started collecting. I got a couple of goats, first of all, which were just too hard to manage. So I decided I wasn't going to be a goat farmer. And then I started collecting milk from a local dairy farm and making cheese in my kitchen. And I went on a few courses at Reading University, and I went to France and did a bit of cheese making for different people in France, and then came back and thought, well, I just absolutely loved it. I love the fact that you've got milk in the morning, and then in the afternoon you've got sort of something that resembles cheese. So I set up Hampshire Cheese Company, and in the very beginning there were some fantastic cheesemongers who helped me decide what sort of cheese was needed on the British market. So I was in Hampshire, I wasn't going to make a territorial, I couldn't make a cheddar because I wasn't in Somerset, I couldn't, I wasn't going to make a Cheshire or a Lincolnshire or a Leicestershire, red Leicestershire or anything like that because I was in Hampshire. So I decided to do a take on a Camembert because there wasn't anyone in the UK sort of producing a really smelly, sort of funky Camembert at the time. And so the first cheese that I'm not sure I perfected, it's an ongoing process, but was Tunworth. And most of you have probably heard of Tunworth. It's pretty well known now. We've been going sort of 18 years, and it's a smelly, creamy Camembert style cheese. It's won loads of awards. It's really popular with lots of chefs, and it's sold in most of the good cheesemongers and farm shops and things. So perhaps if we start by maybe tasting Tunworth. So presumably you've all got your cheeses out, and ideally you want to have them at room temperature, which I'm sure you all know, but I've taken mine out this afternoon at about 2 o'clock, so they should be sort of perfectly warmed up by now. And so we're just going to taste it and see really what we're looking for in terms of flavour. So
what are you looking for in that perfect Tunworth, Stacey? And because when you I mean, obviously you get some variants within your cheeses, but I guess some days you go, wow, this one is perfect. What would be a perfect Tunworth for you?
Yeah, so it does vary during the year, based on what the cows are eating, what time of lactation they're in. So you get variations in the fat and protein, which will affect the mouthfeel. It affects the moisture in the cheese, the drainage of the cheese. So every day, although we try and make a consistent product, it changes every day. So our recipe is tweaked every day according to the fat and protein in the milk and according to the weather outside. So if it's hot and dry outside, obviously our ripening rooms and things are drier than they would be in the damp sort of winter months. So although that's controlled, you can't control the whole process. So every day we tweak things. So what I'm looking for actually is, and I've got this cheese here. So by the time it's sort of 8-9 weeks old, you're looking for it to be completely broken down. So I'm not wanting a core in the middle. And I wanted to feel, I don't know what the word is, but squidgy. So giving, you want to be able to squeeze it and feel that it's got some moisture still in it.
I always say like bread dough is kind of what I like, that kind of, yeah,
exactly.
Bounces back, but that kind of texture.
Yeah, exactly. You want it to bounce back. That's exactly right. I'm also looking for a cheese which has a white coat, which is a penicillin mold that's grown on the surface, but not a thick white coat. So you're looking for a really thin coat, so that the rind is actually part of the cheese. So it's not a separate part to the paste. You want it to be part of the cheese. So we, that's a real that is one of the most difficult things about a white mold cheese, is getting the rind really thin. And so we have hopefully perfected that now, and that's all to do with you know, the moisture and the humidity in your ripening rooms, and the care that you take of cheeses. And we add very little penicillin to our cheese, which means that it takes quite a long time for the penicillin mold to grow. But that's how you get a thin, lovely thin rind. So we don't push our cheeses through quickly.
Mine is looking really, really good.
Good.
This is quite an interesting question, which maybe Andy wants to come in on, but David is asking, Tunworth is my favourite cheese. It's the best in a competitive field. But may I ask, when I buy it from a well-known supermarket, it is not on point? Andy, I think that's one for you, and with your affinage hat on, please.
Well, I just think that supermarkets have they're all about shelf life, so they've got to sell it at a point when it maximizes shelf life, really. And a lot of brie and camembert styles, which are a lot poorer than Tunworth, and that's because I think they make them to be what we call a stabilized brie type or a stabilized camembert type. So they're always ripe, but they're never ripe, if that makes sense. So when you buy them at any stage in their shelf life, they always have this kind of smooth, almost spongy texture, but they never kind of break down in the same way. Tunworth does have that chalkiness, which I think that the way that you make that together, chalkiness, kind of gives that richer depth of flavour at the same time. And so most supermarket bries and camemberts are made to be that stabilised type. Now, when supermarkets buy, well, there's only one supermarket, Waitrose, which does a very good job, buys from Stacey, they don't get that ability of having a cheese that's always ripe. So they have to kind of maximise the shelf life as much as possible, because it's got to sit in a counter. There's nobody controlling it. There's nobody looking at it. When we get the Tunworth into us, we buy maybe between 60 and 120 at a time. We open every single box that comes into us and we give them a squeeze.
Wow.
Because within a batch, there is a little bit of a variance, because as Stacey said, within a maturing room, there'll be some on the corner and there'll be some in the middle of a rack, and there'll be a little bit of a variance in how those break down. And that means we will then separate them to sell them in the right order, even if they were made on the right day. And there's a labour cost in that. There's a time and an effort cost in that. But that's why businesses like mine can still exist, really, hopefully. But there you go. If that answers it.
It does answer it. And I think the supermarkets are very restricted by their regulation of temperatures as well, aren't they? They're probably going to put them in a chiller at 4 degrees or a little bit higher sometimes, but they're going to go in with loads of other products that aren't cheese that have to be at that temperature. So they're going to be restricted in that way. I'll do a top tip. What I do when I go in the supermarkets to buy any sort of camembert, I take them out the box if you can, and then give them a squidge at the side like that. So it's better off that way rather than that way. And then you get a really good idea of how ripe it is and how you like it. Because Claire Lewis is saying, one for you, Andy. All the love here coming in for Tunworth and Andy. I love the fact that I can ring Andy up and say what condition I would like my cheese to be in. E.g., I prefer mine on the younger side rather than too ripe, which is what a lot of people do. You know, they love that chalkiness in the middle. I love when people phone you up.
And I think we have 3 rooms. So we have a big chiller, which is 4 degrees, and then we have a 10-degree room, an 8-degree room, and then the shop. And we will move the Tunworth not just on how they come into us, but also depending on how our sales are going. If we're having a slower week, we'll put things more in the 4 degrees to slow them down a little bit. Whereas if we're selling a lot, we'll put them maybe up to the 8-degree room. So whereas a supermarket just has a chill chain, they just want to keep it as cold as possible for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And that's the slight difference really in that as well. But like Claire, I do sometimes. There's a lot of cheesemakers like a little. I think a lot of soft cheesemakers like a little bit of chalk in because I think that's when it's fully ripe. Stacey's been in the game long enough; she knows she wants it fully ripe. But for her, if she sees that in her store, I guess that's a problem for you, Stacey, seeing a fully ripe cheese in your store.
Yeah, we don't. We have sold the cheeses before they're fully ripe, so to people like you and things. So But I mean, I personally do like them fully ripe. I think that's when you get the most flavour, the most oomph out of them. But I do understand traditionally, the French apparently like a little bit of a chalky core in the middle of their camemberts and soft white mould cheeses. So, but it's a personal preference if you like the core or not. But I totally agree with Andy. The supermarkets, unfortunately, they don't treat an individual cheese with the care that it should really be treated. So I would always say if you're going to buy cheese, you should buy it at a specialist shop. But I know it's not always possible in particularly in sort of rural areas. It's often hard to find good cheesemongers. But
if you are buying it in a supermarket, you can practice a little bit of affinage at home.
That's true.
We do the Affineur of the Year competition. We're trying to get what affinage and maturing is out into the public arena for people to understand. And this is the perfect example. So thank you. And Stacey, do carry on because we've hijacked your lovely.
That's all right. So I just was having a taste of Tunworth. You're looking for a sort of creamy, rich feel in the mouth, and a sort of vegetally aroma and flavour. Again, that changes during the year, and it also changes according to who's tasting it. So we all taste things differently. Some people always taste wild garlic in our cheese. I can taste that sometimes, but not always. Other people say, oh, have you put, normal garlic in there, or have you put, it's got a cauliflower, brassica type of flavors sometimes. So it does change again during the season. But I'm getting really, sort of vegetally, bit of cabbage, cauliflower, that sort of, cauliflower cheese type of smell. And the flavor should be, again, rich, creamy, soft paste.
I think it's a cheese when you eat it, you should know about it, Tunworth. Whereas a lot of bries and camemberts and some other soft cheeses, you just eat and they go, oh, they're very nice. But when you eat Tunworth, you go, oh, hang on, there's a lot to it, isn't there? There's a lot going on, which you kind of want to know about it. I mean, you probably know about it when you open the fridge, to be honest with you, when you've got Tunworth. I always say it's the offending article a lot of the time when if you're wondering what's died somewhere, is you've just got a good Tunworth somewhere. But I think
exactly. So again,
my camper van fridge. Banned from the camper van fridge.
Well, it's banned from my fridge when my children were growing up. They just wouldn't allow me to have it in the kitchen at all. So it is one of those cheeses, very distinctive. The smell's distinctive, and I think the flavour, once you taste it, I think you always recognise that flavour again. And again, in terms of pairing, I think again we've got this lovely wine from that Andy supplied, which is from Tommy Banks, and it's you can tell me about it, Andy. It's a Syrah, and I can't pronounce it.
It's like a classic Southern French red wine. It's not from Southern France, but it's a classic Southern French blend, like Syrah Mourvedre, which is you're getting things like Chateauneuf du Pape and down that south of France region. This is South African. They're the Banks brothers. You may have seen Tommy Banks on TV. There's actually two of them. There's Tommy and James, but Tommy's kind of the front of the business, and his brother James is the brains and the operations and runs it. They have 3 fabulous restaurants, including the Black Swan at Oldstead. And when the pandemic hit, they started canning wines, really because South Africa. I'm not going to go into the details of South African wine industry, but they were banned from transporting or even exporting their wines. And there was no alcohol sales at all in South Africa during the pandemic, so it decimated their industry. And so the Banks brothers bought a lot of South African wine, so they wanted to support it the best way they could, and that's why they did a lot of mail order boxes. And they said that canning a wine is a really interesting thing, because when you can a wine, you capture it at that moment. So if you put it in a bottle, it will further mature. But if you put it in a can, the flavors you get when you put it in the cans, it doesn't change.
Okay.
And so you get kind of much more fresher flavors to a canned wine than you get to a bottled mature wine. But this is a classic French blend from a really great little South African producer. The other reason they said they wanted to can wines is because it's like a one glass size, a large glass size. But this wine would retail in a normal shop for maybe 20, 24 pounds. You know, and that might not be something you want to buy a whole bottle of, but you know, you can buy a glass of and treat yourself. But yeah, it's from the Banks Brothers, and you can buy their range online. But yeah, we asked them, Tommy Banks, to match what he would have with Tunworth, and this is what he chose because kind of the vegetal notes match really well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really good with the cheese. And also with the cans, I think it's much better for the environment, isn't it? Rather than, you know, a lot of winemakers are putting them into cans now, putting wine into cans rather than heavy glass bottles. So, but it's really delicious and great with the cheese. It's got a really nice balance, I think, with the cheese. I also, sometimes I would recommend with our cheeses, because they're quite high in fat, you can often have something like a sparkling wine, and there are a lot of really good sparkling wines around this part of Hampshire and West Sussex, which go very well with Tunworth. And the sort of minerality and the fizz in the wine sort of cuts through, the acid in the wine cuts through the sort of fattiness of the cheese, so they really complement each other. But I think, like, you know, with everything, you know, pairing is very subjective again. So, you know, if you prefer to drink beer or ale or cider or something, you know, you can usually find one that matches with our cheese. So then maybe if we go on to Winslade. So Winslade is a sort of much newer cheese for us. So I'll just hold that up. It is wrapped in a piece of spruce bark, which is now covered with the penicillin mold. And that just holds it in place and also adds flavour to the paste. It adds a sort of woody, slightly smoky flavour. Now, Winslade is really runny and creamy on the inside. So it's a really gooey, runny cheese. So you can either serve it by slicing off the top rind and using a spoon, or cut it into wedges. Once it's been cut, it will ooze everywhere. So it's sort of a one meal cheese. I think you can't really reserve it once you've cut into it. But the beauty of Winslade, I think, is the texture. So it's a gorgeous glossy paste, really voluptuous, and yeah, just I think a beautiful paste. The spruce bark, which obviously you don't eat, comes off in a sort of peel like that, and that adds a really lovely sort of wood, smoky flavour, a bit of a pine resin type of residual flavour on the outside. But I really think it's a great cheese, especially I think for people who maybe find Tunworth a bit strong. I think Winslade is an alternative cheese for them. So again, goes beautifully with this wine, and delicious with the damson paste actually that Andy supplied as well. Just that sweetness along with the glossy paste and the milky creaminess of the cheese, and the sweetness of the damson, tartness of the damson jam really goes beautifully, I think. So yeah, it's delicious.
It certainly is. Sorry, Andy, you go ahead.
No, it's fine. So what made you decide to develop the Winslade? I mean, I always, just while you're on that, I think I actually eat more Winslade than I do Tunworth, because I take it home and it's one of those cheeses. It isn't as big a punch or as big a powerful flavour, but you eat a bit and you go, oh, and you just, the next thing you know, the whole thing's gone, don't you? Because it's so, I think what it exhibits is that kind of really kind of buttery, kind of creme fraiche, hits those flavour points, which is just very easy to eat and eat a lot of, really.
The wonderful thing about it is it's very you know, we've just got Vacherin Mont d'Or coming to season now, haven't we, in September? I think Andy's got a whole mug of that wine, you know. Have you? Have you got a whole wine?
There's the problem with living above the alcohol store and cheese store is that, you know, we can just have everything on top.
How many of those cans can you get in a mug? Sorry, I just had to get that in. What I love about Winslade is that it's available all year round. So Mont d'Or, which is the French cheese, that did you kind of, you know, base it around Mont d'Or, or
Yeah, we did. And when we started making Winslade, we did base it on Mont d'Or, and we did start by washing the rind, which is what they do with Mont d'Or. And then we found that it grew sort of rogue molds on the outside of Winslade when we were washing it. And so, which was fine, we could manage that. But then one Monday morning I came in and the rogue molds had jumped from Winslade onto Tunworth, and the Tunworth had loads of sort of bright yellow, weird looking molds on it. And I said, no, we can't wash it anymore. So it's now become a white mold cheese. Although we don't put any penicillin into the Winslade, it grows a white mold coat because it's matured in the same rooms as Tunworth. So our whole creamery, I think, is just, you know, it's got so much penicillin in the air that that's why it grows on the outside of Winslade. So we don't wash the rind. So it is different in flavour from a Vacherin.
Yeah.
And that I think it's probably not quite as savoury.
Yeah.
As a Mont d'Or.
It's very unique. I love your description of the paste being glossy is perfect. Mine is glowing here on the board. It's just absolutely beautiful. I try and hold it up for people to see, but that is glossy, isn't it? That is just.
Yeah, and I think the spruce bark just gives it that backbone, doesn't it? You know, I think that, you know, because it's really buttery and creamy, and then you just get that little bit of bitterness, which is, you know, bitterness I think a lot of people criticize. And I think what's fabulous about your cheeses, Stacey, is that a lot of white rinded cheeses are bitter. And your cheeses, you know, that's my common problem is whenever you buy a brie, is the rind is bitter, and that's the flavour you're left with, is the astringency. Yeah. And you don't get that in your cheeses, which I think is fabulous. But the spruce adds a touch of bitterness and structure, like you might get if you're having like a Campari or something, that kind of nice bitterness in a good way because of the bark rather than the mold.
Tonic water bitterness. It's and it just starts you thinking about Christmas, doesn't it? In autumn and that Coke lorry, Andy, coming across on your Instagram.
I also think that that this is what's really exciting about Stacey is that a lot of British cheeses, a part of the revolution and the resurgence, are relying on legacy and what people did in the region and what people had to do. And then a lot of French cheeses, if you're a French cheesemaker and you grow up in the Camembert region and you want to make cheese, you're going to make Camembert. You know, that's what you're going to make. You know, you're going to be taught how to make Camembert really well, but then you're going to be a cheesemaker who makes Camembert. One of the advantages to kind of the British cheese industry and people like Stacey, I think, of not having that legacy or not having a history or family passed down to them, is that she can go, oh, actually, I'll do things a bit different. I'll have a go at that Vacherin recipe, but you know what? I won't wash it. You know what? I'll make it slightly softer. You know, I won't put it in the back. And losing history and traditions is negative, but also it doesn't mean that you have this kind of legacy, this tradition, and this knowledge that you think you have to live up to. You know, Stacey could forge her own cheeses, and that's what's fabulous about Winslade, is it's based on various different things, but it's its own little thing, you know. And I think that's really
there's nothing quite like it, I guess, is the key. And it's really interesting, I think, with you know, since I started making cheese 20 years ago, the number of new cheesemakers who are forging their own furrow and doing their own thing. It's incredible, really, because, and as you say, Andy, they're not constrained by
VDOs or AOPs.
Or the history of, you know, they're new to cheese making. You know, like me, a lot of them are new to sort of farming and that sort of environment. So I guess in some ways you go in very green, and which I did, and I look back and think, oh, that, I had no knowledge, so you ask some really stupid questions in the beginning, but because you are so green, I think maybe you push a few boundaries that maybe you wouldn't if you had that history and legacy behind you.
Exactly.
It just, there's good to both sides, isn't there?
And just look at the results. I mean, Stacey's not giving away all her accolades. She's got a Raymond Blanc. It's a lovely little fly. Is it a fly or a moth?
It's a fly.
Oh, wow. Raymond Blanc, absolutely loving. Where have we got?
Where did you get that?
Andy, you've started. Oh, he's clever. You're so clever. Look at that. Look at those accolades. So what are those awards? That's brilliant. Thanks, Andy. I thought we got.
Thank you, Andy, for that.
And just Simon Rogan, a whole chapter of one of his recipe books is dedicated to Tunworth.
Yeah, no, it's
Round
great.
of applause. I'm sorry. You are an awesome cheesemaker, and it's wonderful, wonderful products. We have got a few questions. Can I slot those in now?
Yeah.
Andy's answering all the ones about the damson paste, which is absolutely divine.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
He's answering the questions in the chat about that. But we've got one other question from Rachel about Winslade. What else would you eat with it? What else would you accompany with it? In terms of accompaniments or drinks, what do you like to have with it, Stacey, and maybe Andy as well, if he's okay?
I really like Winslade with some really nice charcuterie. So some really good salamis or sort of copper or Parma ham style of things. It's just got, I think, because of the creaminess of the cheese, the texture of the cheese goes really well with cured meats. And bread, I just think for me, bread is the best thing to have with cheese. I really think that's all you need. In terms of wines, again, the red wine that we've got tonight's delicious, but again, as I said, a sparkling white or certainly a big heavy bodied sort of white wine can go really well with our cheeses as well.
I almost prefer the red wine, the Banks Brothers red wine with the Winslade tonight, but I think my Winslade is maturer than my Tunworth, so
yeah,
it does go really well with that kind of bitterness as well. We've maybe got a question for Andy. Is it true the UK now has more different artisan cheeses than France?
That's I think that's probably a statistics lie, I'm afraid. I would love to say it does. But the French count, for example, in Saint Nectaire, they have 240 producers on a farm level, and they count that as one cheese. Whereas we would count that as, because every farm is different, we'd count it as 240. Yeah. So when we say we've got more, I would love to say that we count every cheddar maker as a different cheese, which has a lot of merit to it because they all have their own character. Whereas they don't, they count every single region. If you make a regional cheese, that's cheese because that's how it's supposed to be. Isn't it? Yeah. So it's a little bit statistics, molding the statistics, but there's no doubt that, having worked in both industries, that Britain is exciting and has changed a lot. You look at the cheese counter that we have at the Courtyard Dairy. Since we've been going, we've only been going 11 years. I mean, I would say that 60% of the cheese on our counter weren't there when we opened. We did a lot more French cheese when we opened. There was no, there was very few blues, there was very few soft cheeses, and I think that's why Stacey's cheese, especially Tunworth, became such a Rip Roll success, because at the time in Britain there was brie styles and camembert styles, but they weren't the quality that you could get abroad. And I think Tunworth was the first one that you would eat in the UK that was British made, that was just like, this is what I get in Camembert, this is what I get in Normandy. It was not the same, but it's of that quality. And I think that's why You go to any fancy restaurant in the UK, there'll be a Tunworth there somewhere. It'll probably be on the menu or definitely be on the cheese course. You know, they love to do it on their little toasts. They love to do it. Some of them love to make it into a custard, and then I've had Tunworth piped on top of pikelets for little bites to eat, you know, and it's you know, I think that has made a key difference. But yeah, the British cheese industry is definitely roughly going in the right direction, as the French is bumbling along a little bit more, but the French still are miles ahead of us, you know, and Stacey will be the first one to admit that the French cheese industry has massively helped the British cheese industry. It's something we often don't talk about in the British cheese resurgence, but that lack of knowledge and that of how to make a good cheese and how to make a cheese by hand in an artisan way, we lost all that knowledge in the UK. And we relied on French dairy consultants to kind of help us rebuild our industry. And I think that has been really key.
I think that's particularly the case with the cheeses like mine and the sort of soft cheeses. I think obviously the territorials and the cheddars, the knowledge has been retained here, and so that's been handed down from generation to generation. But definitely there's a lack of knowledge in the sort of the science of cheese making in the UK. I think you know, the French definitely still are miles ahead on that, particularly with sort of soft cheeses and you know,
and they're very generous in sharing their knowledge, aren't they? I know that you went across to France and learnt from some of their cheesemakers as well, or got some tips, and I know Johnny did with his Baron Bigod, and the French come over to him now, and they all have a big, you know, look, experiment of what they're doing. You know, a lot of the superb goat's cheeses. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And they've got a lot of knowledge there. I went to France, you know, although I've been making cheese for 18 years, you know, it's an ongoing education. And I went to France earlier this year for 2 weeks to do a really intensive course in one of their French Academy of Dairy. And it was just fantastic. And, you know, the knowledge that the teachers had and things, you know, you could just ask them anything about milk or cheese making of any type of cheese, and they just knew the answers off the top of their heads. And unfortunately, we just don't have that here. But hopefully it will, you know, it will start to be part of the education system here, the tertiary education, or, you know, maybe we can, you know, well, you're starting it with the Academy of Cheese, but, you know, there's a certain level of information that we really need to build on, I think.
Dairy, especially the dairy science massively. Which brings me round to another question about the milk for your cheese. So where does that come from? Is that just up the road? Yeah.
So, yes, we buy our milk from a single farm. We've been buying from them for about 10 years. They are really great sort of tradition. They're a fairly traditional farm. They've got a lot of grass, and the cows, what they've done, they were just a Holstein Friesian herd, and when we started buying milk from them, they started doing some crossbreeding. So they've put in a bit of a mix of Montbéliard and Swedish red cows, which has given us a better fat to protein ratio. And they've done quite a lot with the feeds to change the feed to suit us, and also change their calving patterns. So they were just autumn calvers. They've now spread that out. So they calve between July and December, which helps us sort of have a bit more of and they're now next year also putting in a spring, some spring calvers. So they've really worked closely with us on producing the best milk they can for cheese making, which is just fantastic. So it's really good to have that relationship with a farm that's, you know, local.
Yeah, wonderful, because it's so important.
Yeah, really important.
You never covered, Stacey, why you decided to develop the Winslade. What made you decide to go, because Tunworth was so successful, and what made you decide to add a second cheese in?
Well, it was sort of I think Charlotte, who has been with me since 2006, so she's my cheesemaker, and I think we were a bit bored and we just wanted to have a second cheese. So it was sort of started as a bit of an experiment and, just to see. And of course you think, oh, we can make one cheese, so it can't be that hard to make a second cheese. But of course it's really difficult to make a second cheese of the same quality. And obviously we didn't want to put a cheese out there on the market that wasn't going to be the same quality as Tunworth. So it took quite a few years for us to be happy with the recipe and to be, happy to sell it. So, I guess it was a bit of boredom. Now I think our sales, in terms of sales, Winslade's about 25% of our sales, so which is great. We're really pleased with that. It's a little bit more difficult to make, so we're quite happy that it stays at 25%.
Yes. Rachel's actually asking, have you got any other cheeses in the pipeline or in the boredom line?
Look, we would love to make some other cheeses, but at the moment we haven't got the space to make any more than we are. So that's sort of on hold at the moment. But we're always looking at different things.
Better to make these really, really well than spread it too thin, isn't it?
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important in terms of the business too, is just to really concentrate on the two cheeses that we make. I think it's pretty difficult to make a good cheese consistently well. And I think for us, making the two cheeses is more than enough. Yeah.
We've got another lovely compliment here from Bill. He's saying, if I could only have one cheese for the rest of my life, it would without any doubt be Tunworth.
Oh, that's lovely.
From the Courtyard Dairy, obviously. What do you want, Bill? How much do you want? Brilliant. Any more questions? Anybody in the chat? Andy, did you have anything
Stacey,
else?
how many cheeses will you make on an average week?
An average week is about 5,000 to 6,000 cheeses.
Oh, wow.
So I know it sounds a lot, but actually we're still one of the smallest. I suppose each year we make about 80 tons of cheese. So we're still pretty small.
That's what I always say, is that because they're so small a cheese that, if you compare it to a whole cheddar and how many you fit in, it's fairly comparable, isn't it? In terms of what most farms will be turning out in terms of like something like Applebee's Cheshire or something like that.
Yeah.
And what will your uplift be for Christmas? How much more will you have to make for Christmas? And do you have the
So we have about 6 weeks where we make 7 days a week. So we'll be making, I think, about 13,000 a week for those 6 weeks. So it's a busy time, really busy time. That the one thing I would say is it'd be really nice if people ate as much cheese all year round as they do at Christmas time, and it would make it much easier for the cheesemakers, I think, because we all, I think, have the same problem that we get such a lift at Christmas, which is fantastic, but it would be easier if people ate more in January and February.
Yeah, which is one of the points of the Big Cheese Weekender as well, to spread it out a bit. Try a different cheese, try a cheese that you haven't tried before. Jane is actually asking Andy as well, how are your Christmas delivery slots filling up? I think she's starting to get worried.
Oh, you should be very worried. I think you should buy now, buy.
buy.
Yeah, no, there's only a certain amount you can do, isn't there, Stacey? And we're not an infinite business, and there's a skill to making a cheese, and there's a skill to cutting it and getting it out as well. And we ordered our Christmas cheese about 2 weeks ago off Stacey, so we know what we're getting. Because we have to put those orders in early, otherwise, she can only make so many. So we take a certain amount of orders every Christmas, and when they're full, that's it. And I think that's the same with Stacey. I know that I know, it is what it is, isn't it? It's when you're small artisan producers, there's not much you can do.
Exactly, which was what happened during the pandemic, Andy, as well. Everybody had stopped, made cheese for the events that were going to be happening and the airlines and whatever else, those orders that come in, and then those things stopped happening, and trains and whatever else. So there's a lot of pre-planning goes on for cheesemakers, even with these young cheeses. So it's important that the cheesemongers get their orders in. We've got another question about what happens when you go away. You know, you go on your holiday or you go on a cheese course, or do you take on more people at Christmas to help with the production?
Yeah, we take on a few. So we've got usually 3 sort of students come in, and 3 or 4 of them come in and help with sort of mainly the sort of wrapping and boxing of the cheeses. That's the thing that we seem to get stuck on. And, you know, my team do work an extra day, so they'll work a 6-day week for those 6 weeks. So it's really all hands on deck. You know, we might work longer hours and things like that, but it's part of the business. You know, that's how it works.
Yeah. And we've got 2 more questions. How much milk does it take to make 1 Tunworth? Which is a good question.
About 1.8 litres. Yeah, so just under 2 litres.
Yeah.
Again, that varies according to the protein and fat, but about 1.8 litres.
And you might not want to answer this question, but how many of your cheeses do Waitrose buy versus other buyers?
Oh,
Waitrose are massive and they have a lot of stores.
They do. I think they take about 12% of our stock.
Oh, that's good though. So it's
you know,
still a massive amount goes to the independents.
Yeah. And that's, you know, that's how I don't want to be reliant on you know, on any one customer really. Yeah.
Make good business sense, would it?
No.
Fantastic. Well, the only questions I've got, one question is to Andy, if you don't mind, Stacey, is the Courtyard Dairy is expanding. There's been things on Instagram, on the internet, of this massive cheese sign that is at the side of the building, and I have heard a rumor there's a restaurant opening. A famous
so we've I don't know, I think we had a breakdown in the pandemic, and we had planning permission for a very small extension pre-pandemic, but towards the end of the pandemic we thought, well, how long are we going to do it for? What do we need? What will future-proof it for the next 20 years? And getting a mortgage for that. So we built a huge extension, which is due to open 2 weeks today, actually. But most of it isn't customer-facing. We don't really like customers, to be honest with you. We tolerate them, so we're trying to keep them out of most of the business. But the cheese shop will stay.
He's joking, everyone.
Yeah. The cheese shop will stay as it is, but we put the museum back in, enlarged that a little bit, just to tell the story of people like Stacey, because I think as a nation we're so disconnected from our food. You know, and there's people like Stacey making by hand from really great little farms that need supporting, and I think so we're trying to tell that history and that story, and also what artisan cheese is. And then we've got a nice big restaurant which we've got into partnership with a cheese bar in London. So they're fabulous 3 restaurants in London, and they're running like a pizza cheese restaurant, which just up here as well. And then we've put in a lot more space for our distribution, you know, for mail order and things like that. And making a small amount of cheese. We do a bit of cheese making courses. We know we've got a very good farm like Stacey next door to us, who farms New Zealand method. So he only farms in the spring and the summer. And we think it'd be nice to just link up those dots a little bit. But it's not our main remit. Our main remit is we want to sell more cheese, really. That's why if you come to the restaurant and the museum, you have to come through the shop. You know, we're like IKEA. You know, you have to get past mountains of cheese before you get anywhere in our business.
Well done, you. Well done, you.
Well, it's a great industry to work with. You know, I've worked with Stacey now in my own business for 11 years, and I think 4 or 5 years before that. And what I would say just to finish off is that having bought Stacey's cheese for 15 years, the thing that gets me is just how consistent it is. You know, even it's just as a British white rinded soft cheese, it just is a lovely cheese, and you can always bet that Tunworth will always be outstanding. And Stacey's great to deal with. She makes cheese in a really great way, and you know, and worth championing. So if you see her cheese, it is worth grabbing, both of them. You know, we want Stacey to be here next year, so you've got to eat a year's worth of cheese. And then maybe she won't moan about it. She won't moan about Christmas.
Yeah, eat cheese all year round, folks. I think the people we've got with us tonight do. This is recorded, so hopefully we'll keep pushing it out there as well. Stacey, was there anything else you wanted to say before we say goodnight?
No, just thank you very much, and thank you, Andy, for that. Talk about Tunworth and Winslade, and yeah, do get to settle if you can, because Andy has a fantastic setup there, and it's and as Andy said, it's a great industry to be in. You know, people in the cheese industry are so nice. You know, that's one thing I love about the industry. You know, as you say, they're willing to share experiences and share, you know, willing to help you get started. I had so much help from different cheese makers and mongers when I first started, and hopefully I'm now doing the same for new up and coming cheese makers. And it's just a really lovely, yeah, collaborative group of people to be involved with.
I'd say cheers to that, guys, with Andy with his mug, and Stacey, hopefully you've got a little wine. Cheers.
I've got a big wine.
Cheers to that. Good. Yeah, well, I've got a big glass of white actually as well on the side. Thank you. I totally agree with all you've said. Lots of lovely comments and lots of love in the chat. And thank you so much to both of you. Stacey supporting the Academy of Cheese, Andy supporting the Academy of Cheese, and all that we're trying to do to support makers and mongers and consumers, and cheese lovers. So thank you very much. Just before we say goodbye, so we're live tomorrow at Borough Market with live events in person. We're actually going to see people at the Guild's offices in number 42, and then virtuals tomorrow. We've got White Lake Cheese doing for Geeks Hour about maturation of award-winning cheeses. Then we've got the lovely cheese lady up in Scotland, not Glasgow. She's up in Scotland doing unlocking the secrets to eating cheese all year round, what we've been talking tonight. Then we've got the lovely Laura from Indie Food doing cheese and whiskey pairing. Andy's a bit partial to that as well, I think. I've seen those come up at Courtyard. And then finally tomorrow night we've got Booze to Choose with the Red, White and Blues, and we've got Long Clawson are taking that one on, or Clawson as they now call themselves, which is fantastic. They've been going 100 years. So we're going to have a fun day tomorrow. It's packed. We're racing around from live events back to places to get on the computer to do the virtuals. So wish us luck. Have a very lovely Big Cheese Weekender, and thank you to you both, Stacey and Andy, for taking part tonight. Legends.
Thank you, Tracy.
Legends. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye.